This video was done in 1998 when I was hired to do an inspection on a satellite dish install at a restaurant, and it wasn't working. The owner was suing the installation company and he needed evidence. This is the tape of the evidence. June 13th, 1998, 11:43 a.m. We're going to be heading up on the roof of this restaurant to inspect the satellite dish installation. We'll walk towards the dish, show all the deficiencies in the installation. You'll observe that nuts haven't been tightened on properly. This is very rusty. A lot of play in here on the top bracket, which means that the dish can shake quite easily in the wind. Nothing to stop that from moving. And they've installed a hand crank as opposed to a motor controlled actuator, making it impossible to control the dish from inside the building. Somebody has to actually come up here and crank it by hand to change from one satellite to another. Completely non-standard mount assembly. There's the hand crank again. You'll notice that there are cable connections coupled outside, not protected in any way from the weather. That's a recipe for disaster when water gets into this connection. Again, we see exactly the same thing on the LNB. Again, no cover placed over the LNB assembly to protect it from the weather, and no sealant used on any of the cable connections. Just a little bit of yellow plastic tape wrapping around some of the wires that are just twisted together for the polar rotor. There's a mess of wiring. Dish is held in place by 10 40-pound bags of rocks. That is all that is holding this dish on the roof, other than the 4x4 blocks of wood that it is mounted to. This is a 10-foot dish. I also want to document the installation of the Dish Network dish. There's the Dish Network dish, and what it is it's mounted on a piece of wood which is just covered with rocks, as we'll show you. Well, there's the base. That base is not secured in any way, shape, or form to the building. It is loose. I can lift it. It is just sitting there. It's on a piece of plywood covered with gravel from the roof. And that's all that holds the dish in. Again, a good gust of wind. Well, you can see how loose it is. It's not a very secure fit. And a gust of wind will move that. It doesn't take much to be off the satellite. If I can move it that much with one finger, you can imagine what some wind loading can do. There's the back side of the installation. It's been recovered with rocks. That dish should be moved and secured to a secure location, possibly on the cinder block here. That would be the most logical place to mount that dish. And that's how it should have been mounted in the first place. And just for a laugh, I figured I'd take a picture of the TV antenna. This is for the local TV reception. You notice what's been done here. Just a pair of rabbit ears. He's put a matching transformer on it. Actually, he put some electrical tape on this, but it's not enough really to seal it. You need to use coaxial seal. As you can see, it's already coming off. That's not going to keep any water out. But this is the funny part. Look at how this thing has been attached. It's put on a block of 2x4, and there's just been some rocks piled on it. Of course, the rocks don't stay there very long. As you can see, half of them have fallen off already. Again, a good gust of wind. It's not going to take much to knock that off. We get high winds in this area, that'll go flying. Moving back to the big dish, I want to show some close-ups of some of the key points of this installation which are inadequate. The lower hinge assembly has no nut on it to hold it in place. That should be bolted in place. This has no elevation adjustment other than that provided by adjusting bolts, adjusting nuts on the end of 2 bolts. Again, totally inadequate. This looks like a homemade type bracket. Certainly nothing of commercial quality, which is easy to adjust. In fact, this entire bracket looks to be homemade. If we look at the top, I already showed this part, this bolt that's not even tightened up, it's loose. Top is the same. It looks to be new bolts put onto old hardware. Again, a very rusty mount. If we look at some of these welds here, some of these welds look pretty shoddy. Speaking of shoddy, this is how they splice cable. We got cables up here that are not insulated. There's 2 runs here that are not insulated to anything. 2 of them that have got little bits of yellow tape stuck on them. This is spliced into what looks to be telephone wire that runs to the dish itself, along with the coaxial cable for the C-band LNB. So that about covers it. I'm going to move around to the other side of the dish now to show the other. As you can see, these pipes here look to be relatively new compared to the rusty ones. Look at this one. Look at this pipe here. It's split. Well, what this fellow's done is this pipe is too big. So he's cut the pipe itself so he can put a clamp around it and squeeze the pipe so that it will fit this mount that came from God knows where, maybe from an old installation that was taken down. Same thing has been done on this one here. The pipe has been cut in order to fit a larger pipe, larger diameter pipe onto a smaller diameter mount. But these other pipes here look to be the original pipes. And they're very rusty by comparison to the newer pipes, which is a pretty good indication that this unit was removed from service somewhere and reinstalled here. Looking at the dish again, so I don't trip on some cables. The support that holds the LNB looks to be relatively new in comparison to the dish. The reason I suggest this is the color difference. Generally, when you buy a dish, all this comes from the same manufacturer and they're painted to be the same color as the dish itself. It looks like these arms were replaced. Maybe they were damaged on the original dish when it was removed from service or whatever was the history of this dish. We don't know, but these do not look to be original equipment. And they should be original equipment. They affect the angle and the focal length between the LNB and the dish. They have to be exact. And we're talking down to within fractions of an inch. If your focal length is not correct, then you cannot properly focus the microwave energy from this dish onto the LNB. Now, even though you could buy 4 more arms, even if you buy 4 arms that are all the same length, if they are not exactly the same length measured down into the fractions of an inch to the original arms, that will move your center focal point either further away from the dish if all 4 arms are a little bit longer, or slightly closer to the dish if all 4 arms are a little bit shorter, which will affect your focal length from the center of the dish to the LNB, which will affect your signal strength and your overall performance. Upon inspecting the signal strength, even with the signal maximized, the signal strength at the receiver is inferior. In fact, we couldn't even get a strong enough signal to properly lock the video cipher module. It kept going in and out of lock due to a weaker signal. Plus, as the gusts of wind pick up, the dish itself can actually shake. See the shaking here? I'll move the camera over here, but see the shaking? Now, it doesn't take much to shake the dish. You shake a dish like that, and it goes right off the satellite, and that can all be attributed to this mount. The whole thing torques up. Even down here, you see it torquing up? No, that's not me shaking the camera either. That's the mount itself. As you'll see. Well, I guess it's kind of hard when I'm shaking the dish and holding the camera, eh? Trust me, the whole mount does move. When I shake the dish and let go of it, you can see the whole mount does shake. This whole assembly. And that's just due to the fact that it is not supported in any way other than resting on a pipe here. This is just sitting over top of a pipe. This one's clamped to this thinner pipe, as well as this one being clamped. The proper type of installation uses a polar mount system, which I will explain a little bit later on this tape how the polar mount system works and show you a proper installation of how a dish should be installed using a polar mount. A polar mount requires a 3.5-inch outside diameter pole to be mounted to a base, which could then be weighted down. And the polar mount actually just bolts onto a pole, which is plumbed. None of this 4 poles triangulation type of mount. This is completely inferior. Doesn't provide the required support for a dish of that size. Well, folks, there you have it. This is the proper installation. This is a proper polar mount that mounts on a pole. Has your adjustments for your elevation. Adjustment bolt right there for elevation. Your declination is set with these bolts. And it has a standard Von Weiss actuator, which is covered by a boot here. Keep the rain out of it. All proper installations have this boot installed. Keeps water out from the actuator itself. This installation was installed about 4 years ago. It's starting to show a little bit of rust. It's heavily used, it's constantly moved, and is performing flawlessly. Very simple installation. All that's required is one pole to be mounted into a mount that the whole assembly just bolts onto. Very easy to set up, very easy to adjust. So this is part of the problem with our last installation. There's no place to mount this bearing that is required for the Von Weiss arm, because this has to couple back and forth. It has to swivel as the dish extends and the arm moves back and forth. And that's missing. That's why the other mount is not usable, because of the way that they've attached the crank, the hand crank. You have no place to install the bearing assembly. The universal joint is what it's called. It's very simple, and that's the way to do it right.